Radiant and Resilient is about mindset and faith to break paradigms and overcome challenges in our life. Because when the mind, body, and spirit are aligned, we literally radiate from the inside out. I'm Kay Vasquez. Let's dive in.
In the last episode, I dove into ego versus soul desire. And in order to achieve everything that our soul is desiring, God wants us to surrender the outcome, right? When and how it's going to happen. But surrendering isn't always easy to do. In fact, we resist surrendering. I always like to say that the opposite of surrendering is resisting. And the reason why we resist is because we don't want to let go of control, which is what surrender is. Surrender requires us letting go of control. And we've touched a little bit on it in my episode with Jenna on just like really learning how to surrender and let go, release control. But I want to dive in a little bit more on how to actually surrender, because surrender is actually easier than you think. I also like to say that it's the resistance that's harder than surrendering, because when we're resisting, it creates so much tension and tightness and pressure in the body, and we're like fighting and working hard because we're trying to hold on control. But there are actually 3 steps that lead to surrender. And if you follow these 3 steps, it actually allows surrender to happen naturally without effort, which sounds amazing, right? And I didn't realize this until I read a series called the Christ Mind Trilogy. And it wasn't until the 3rd book called The Way of the Knowing where it dove into, they call it the 4 keys to peace. But when I really learned about it, I'm like, really, it's the 3 keys to surrender. Because if you can follow these 3 steps, you naturally move into a state of surrender. And when we can move into that state of surrender, that's when we can really truly experience the peace that comes from within. And that's what I've learned on this journey, is that journey to surrender of letting go control. And what are we letting go control of? Our thoughts, our beliefs, our patterns, conditioning, things that aren't serving us, because we're so focused on achieving things outside of us. We're focused on what the world says we should do and who we should be, right? But if we can surrender and release control, especially when things are happening in our life with people, circumstances that are out of our control, because in reality, the only thing we can truly control is our thoughts, our feelings, what we say, what we do, right? And if we can recognize that we only have the power to control ourselves, we have no power to control anyone else or circumstances in our life, it allows that journey to surrender to be easier. But again, like I said, I'm going to share 3 steps that's going to make that journey even easier and allows that surrender to actually happen a lot naturally. And so when I shared these 3 steps with a couple of my clients after they'd gone through Already Enough and we were working in Already Enough Accelerator, surrender started to become easier for them as well. So the first step is recognizing your desire. And that's why I did the episode on ego versus soul desire first, because we have to really tune in and check in. What are we truly desiring? And is it coming from the ego or is it coming from our soul? Because again, society, the world conditions us to focus on desires outside of us in order to feel a certain way, to feel peace, to feel love, to feel joy, to feel fulfillment, to feel a specific feeling. It's the feeling that we want to feel all the time. So if we have this, then we'll feel that. That's what we've been conditioned. So recognizing when you're really truly desiring something, like desiring something with your health or with your family, in your career, in your life, is it coming from the ego or is it coming from my soul? Because if it's coming from the ego, you want to let it go. Want to let it go and really get out of your head and what society is saying you should have to feel a certain way, and tune into your heart and say, hey, God, can you reveal to me what my heart really truly desires? What does my soul truly desire? How can I really truly experience that peace, love, joy from within? And then once you get clear on what it is that your soul really truly desires, whether it's with your health, with your family, relationships, your business, your career, the next step is setting an intention. Now, I've recorded an episode on this a while back. It's episode 9, and I'll link the episode here in the show notes so you don't have to go back through all the episodes. But if you haven't yet, I highly recommend listening to it. So you may have to just pause, go and listen to it, and then come back and listen to the next step, because intention is so important. I cannot stress enough how important intention is, because the intention that we set has a specific energy behind it. And so once you get really clear on what your soul is desiring, say with your health, for example, set the intention of achieving that. Now, through my experience, if you've listened to the episode, when I've worked with clients who, for example, wanted to lose weight, had a hard time losing weight. So go back and listen to the episode, like I said, if you haven't yet, to understand why they had trouble losing weight, because it was the wrong intention. It affected their body energetically, mentally, emotionally, physically, which made it harder for them to lose the weight. But when they set a different intention around just like being healthier or having more energy, they actually achieved that. Because again, it was a different energy that was created in their body, which helped them feel differently. And mentally, emotionally, they were able to take action and align their action steps to be able to achieve that. So the second step to surrendering is setting an intention. And to take it a little bit further, also check in, is this intention for my will or for God's will? Because again, sometimes we can get caught up in the ego, especially around the intention. So really ask yourself, get honest. By setting this intention, is it in alignment with God's will? Is it going to help advance His kingdom? By me having, like going back to health, for example, instead of losing the weight, by me just feeling better, having more energy, that's going to be in alignment with His will, because God wants us to thrive. He wants us to be radiant. He wants us to feel our best so we can go out and make an impact and serve others, right? It's really hard to do that when we're not feeling well. So making sure that intention is alignment with God's will, not ours, because it's like going back to losing the weight, for example, that's more our will than God's will, right? Because that's more rooted in pride. We want to look a certain way, because if we think that if we look a certain way, then we will blank, right? Goes back to, then we will feel happy, then we will feel, peace, then we will attract a partner, right? When in reality, attracting a partner for the rest of your life shouldn't be based on looks. It should be based on soul to soul heart connection. So anyway, that's a whole nother episode. Just providing an example, whether it's with our health, our relationship. So finding that partner, that spouse, is it for our will to fulfill a fleshly desire that we want, a sinful nature? Is it something like, that we want to fulfill, or is it actually for God's will? Because God's will is like, yeah, I want to find a spouse because I actually want connection. I want to spend a life growing with someone because we're meant to be in partnership, to be in a covenant of marriage with someone long term. In the business, it's like, okay, am I here for my will to make a lot of money and be successful, or is it God's will to advance His kingdom, to reach more people, to have a greater impact, to change lives? So really tune into, what is that intention? And how does it feel energetically in the body? That's going to let you know whether that intention is coming from ego or coming from your soul, and is in alignment with God's will for my life. And then the third step is allowance, which I think is probably the hardest step, is allowing the desire to happen once you set that intention. Because allowance involves revoking every perception that you ever had about anyone or everything. Let me say that again. It involves revoking every perception you've had, because subconscious mind, ego, is going to create perception about things that are happening in our life with other people and circumstances, right? So if we don't achieve a specific desire that we want in our life, we're quick to blame someone else or blame a circumstance for why we didn't get it, right? And that's because of just the beliefs the patterns and conditioning, everything that we have taken on from things that have happened in our past, we create this perception. So we have to let go of the perception of how it's going to happen, because when we are so focused on it happening a certain way and it doesn't happen that way, that's when we get caught up in the suffering. The expectation is what leads to suffering and resistance. So allowance is seeing and feeling things differently than you have before. Allowance is also releasing the attachment to the outcome. So when you move into allowance, you're basically allowing life to unfold and flow for your highest good. Because at the end of the day, if there's something that your soul is desiring and the intention is in alignment with God's will, we surrender and let go of the outcome, it will happen. It will happen. Maybe not in the way that we expect and the timing that we want, but it will happen. So recognize when we can move to a place of allowance, we're basically letting go of the outcome. We're letting go of how and when it should happen. And when we can move to that place and have faith and trust that it will, because it's coming from our soul and it's in alignment with God's will, then the next step is surrendering. The surrender is what happens naturally and effortlessly. You just move into it. Because the allowance is just that releasing, right? That releasing of that control, like Jenna talked about in her episode. When we're holding on tight fists, and then we can just like let go, open palms, and wait and receive. And as I mentioned in my episode with Dr. Tabitha Barber, we still have to do our part, still tune in and listen to like, okay, this is what I desire. What are the action steps in alignment with that? Obviously we can't just sit back and be like, all right, God, I'm ready. We still have to take action and do our part. But our part also involves having the faith and trust that it will happen, because we've let go of when and how it will happen. And God will work in his supernatural way to make it happen. And you will be so amazed when you finally achieve the desire of your heart. So the 3 steps is desire, making sure it's coming from your soul. So what is your soul truly desiring? 2nd is setting that intention, making sure it's in alignment with God's will. And then 3, just allowing, moving into a place of allowance to happen on God's time, not our time. And when we can follow those 3 steps, we go into surrender naturally, effortlessly. And then when we can move into that place of surrender, that's when we can really truly experience God's peace. That is those 3 steps to surrender. If you found this helpful, please let me know. I'd love to hear from you. Let me know, what was your biggest takeaway? And if you actually applied these steps, like what actually happened and how did it happen? Please share with me. I love hearing stories, because my goal is to make the process easier and simpler through my own experience of understanding, okay, this is the path to surrender, just following these simple, easy steps. Boom, surrender happens naturally. Now, it's a process because, again, the conditioning is not used to us following these steps. But if you practice these steps over and over again, naturally the surrender comes easier and easier and easier. So let me know. Send me a message on Instagram at the Kate Vasquez. I'd love to hear your takeaways. If you found this helpful, please let me know. And in the meantime, keep tuning in as we continue this journey, becoming our most radiant and resilient self.